Well, so much for that plan. So today is the RTX 3090 launch. If you guys saw my earlier video today, I was absolutely unsuccessful at getting an RTX 3090. Every website just seemed to be glitching out, but as the day went on, I did get a little bit lucky and I was able to at least get my hands on an MSI Ventus 3090. A friend loaned it to me just so I can do some testing on it, see how it's like, put it on the channel, compare it against the 3080. So here it is, the MSI 3090. Let's take off this little plastic wrapping here. Now it's not a Founders Edition, but it is one of the third-party partner cards, so that's pretty cool. So today we're just going to take a quick look at it. I still want to do some benchmarks and some testing. So let's see how it is, especially compared to the 3080. All right, guys, remember to subscribe and let's get started. So here it is. This is the MSI 3090 Ventus. Very heavy. That's a good sign. I like it when it's a heavy GPU. Do you hear the paper? Do you hear the plastic? You like that, huh? It's like ASMR now. Do you hear the plastic? Oh, let me unbox it for you. Wow, nice. All right, anyway, here it is, the Ventus 3090. Wow, that's a beefy GPU. I don't think it's as big as the Founders Edition, but it's certainly not a small GPU at all. It has the dual 4-pin power connectors there. Nice backplate. I believe it may be metal. I don't think it's some type of composite. Very nice design, very clean design too. On the back here, you have that exposed, which is really nice. Now this is it side by side with the 3080. It's definitely substantially larger. Not as much height-wise, but it's definitely wider. And definitely heavier than this 3080 here. Alright guys, so I have the MSI 3090 running in the background there. First, let me give you some impressions on the actual build quality. Now, I've tested a 3080 Founders Edition as well as a third-party 3080, the PNY Accelerate. Now, in terms of build quality, this MSI GPU definitely feels pretty good. It feels heavy, feels nice and substantial. Of course, the Founders Edition is still the best of the bunch by far, and I think at least this 3090 does feel better than the PNY 3080 that I've tested. That one just has some more plastic bits on it and things of that nature. It feels a little bit lighter. So overall, this 3090 definitely built pretty well. This is the Ventus. I know MSI does have higher tiered 3090s, such as the Trio, but in terms of the way the actual card feels, which is definitely a big experience for somebody who's buying a GPU like this, you want to know that the build quality is good, that the GPU at least feels substantial, that it's going to last a long time. After all, it definitely is an expensive GPU. So definitely this one feels nice. I haven't tested the Founders Edition 3090, but if it's anything like the Founders 3080, I think that's going to be the king in terms of build quality. It probably feels very heavy and substantial if it's anything like the 3080. And then the second point in terms of design and aesthetics, it's a very straightforward and sort of, you could even say bland GPU. There's not too much RGB lighting going around. Even the other third-party 3080, these are designs that we've seen for the last few years. That's why the Nvidia's Founders Edition looks so cool, just because it's so different with its pass-through cooling design, the color scheme, even the material choice. It just feels like it's a whole different artistic level in terms of design. These, especially this 3090 here, it feels like the other generation GPU, so while that's fine, it's a very understated, maybe workstation level GPU. Nothing too over the top here, so it definitely makes a lot of sense for a workstation. I think definitely, once again, the king here is going to be the Founders Edition, because that's just going to look completely unique. Now, in terms of the thermals, the 3090 certainly runs pretty hot. Even when running Heaven benchmark and letting it run for a while, this got around to 75 Celsius, and that's with the window open, just like you see it here, nothing on the bottom. Basically just a 3-fan design. Now, the Founders Edition 3080 that I had in the same case before, it got similar numbers around that 75 Celsius range, so they definitely do get pretty warm. Now, the third-party 3080 that I tried, which is the PNY one, that one was definitely significantly cooler. It was more in the 60s, maybe 65. It's just a little bit smaller, and I don't think it's putting out nearly as much heat as this 3090. Now, if we view these numbers sort of as standalone numbers, they do seem maybe a little bit on the higher side compared to the previous previous generation, but you have to remember the amount of power that something like the 3090 is putting out, even over like a 2080 Ti. It just has so much raw power and of course more power usage. So with that, it's definitely going to come with a bump in the heat output, but overall the GPU seems to be handling it fine. I mean, most of them in the 70s. If you really want to get down cooler to like 40 Celsius or something like that, you're going to have to water cool these bad boys. I'm sure some of the higher end 3090 coolers will get you down even lower, but at least that's been my brief experience with this so far with some testing. Now, in terms of the audible noise, it's actually pretty quiet. The 3080 was fairly quiet, but once in a while I would hear a little bit of a whine, maybe a coil whine or something like that coming from it when it was really spinning fast. So that one definitely had maybe a little bit more noise than something like this. This one's fairly quiet. The 3080 third-party card was also pretty quiet. So noise definitely isn't as much of an issue here. Definitely considerably better than the blower style GPUs of generations past. These definitely are managing noise significantly better, but once in a while they're putting out so much power, so much heat, you're definitely going to hear them. They're not completely silent when you're really going 100%. And remember, a lot of them definitely do have sort of that 0 RPM fan technology. If it's not under load, it's going to be completely quiet. So overall, I think noise performance is definitely pretty decent for a GPU that's this powerful. And then briefly, let's kind of touch on who this 3090 GPU is for. It's definitely not just for the gamer. I mean, if you're an enthusiast and you have the budget, definitely you're going to get maybe 10 to 15% more depending on the game. Some games you may get more, especially games that are going to take more advantage of the VRAM, because this does have 24 gigabytes of VRAM compared to the 3080 at 10 gigabytes. Overall, the 3080 is a much better value if you're just going to be gaming. This really is a workstation prosumer type of GPU, really meant for like 3D rendering and Blender, even maybe like DaVinci Resolve or something like that. If you're doing like higher resolutions, that's what I plan to use it for in the future, editing these higher resolution footage files. Nvidia did say, of course, that this has Titan level performance, but it's not quite a Titan, because Nvidia still said that there are a lot of sort of workstation optimized drivers that work on the current Titan, but they're not going to be optimized in the drivers for this GPU. So if some people want to use certain applications, the previous generation Titan RTX may actually perform better in certain applications. That's something important to note, and that kind of shows you that this isn't a fully fledged Titan card. It still has some restrictions, even though it's a very, very individualized GPU, very niche GPU. It has great performance, but that's going to come at a tremendous cost, and not everything is open yet. Like I mentioned, these sort of Titan level optimized drivers, that's something Nvidia may change in the future, or they may really change it by releasing an actual Titan. I guess they do have to keep that open to incentivize people to upgrade to something that's that expensive. That way they can utilize whatever pro apps and rendering and things of that nature that are going to fully take advantage of it. But in gaming, it doesn't make too much sense because the price difference is so massive compared to the smaller performance game. And I guess if you do want to game in 8K with the extra VRAM, that definitely does get utilized more and more by 8K. And if you have the budget for an 8K TV, it's not very common. I think this is definitely one of the few cards that would do it, but I think mostly it's going to be for content creators and it really used as a workstation GPU. And to that end, if you view it against the Titan RTX, which was like $1,000 more as MSRP, this is actually a pretty good value, considering that for most applications it's going to absolutely crush the Titan RTX, aside from the few applications that Titan is actually optimized for. But in general, across the board, this GPU is going to be considerably more powerful for significantly less money. And also, if you compare this to the previous generation 20 Ti, sure, against the 3080, there's not that much of a benefit for gaming here. But against the 2080 Ti, which was a $1,200 GPU, and if this is a $1,500, $1,600 GPU for maybe 25% more cost, you do get a substantial increase in performance, because the 3090 definitely is a huge jump over the 2080 Ti. It just doesn't seem like a big deal now because we have the 3080, and the 3080 is such a substantially good performer that it really sort of skewed that price to performance ratio, and I think it made the situation a little bit worse for the 3090 that came up after it. So yeah, of course, if you run benchmarks, you're definitely going to see much better numbers out of the 3080. Of course, if you run benchmarks, synthetic benchmarks and things of that nature, you're always going to see higher numbers out of the 3090. But depending on the benchmark, it's not usually a wallop. It's not 50% better. Sometimes it's around 20, 15%, depending on what. For example, if I run the benchmark superposition on the 3080, I'll get maybe 16,500. On the 3090, you're more like in the 17,600s. So it's definitely a bump there. But I think the 3080, even at 4K, is already so powerful that I don't think you're going to notice that little bit of a difference with the 3090. It is possible in certain games that the 3090 will maintain a better minimum frames per second, which would definitely be a positive and help in certain more difficult games. But overall, for the cost you're paying, the 3080 definitely seems like the superior deal. Not to mention that the 3090, even though it is sort of marketed as a gaming card, just a very minimal amount compared to the huge price. And if you look at other things that would draw you to buy something like this, like aesthetics or build quality, you're not getting anything here really that you can't get with the 3080, unless they release a very special and specific 3090, let's say like a Kingpin edition, and if they don't have it for a 3080, that would be an entirely different story. Now, the only thing that's really unique definitely is that Founders Edition. I think it looks really great for the 3090. It's a massive GPU, so if you like sort of an aesthetic piece with a really unique cooler, I could see the argument for getting something like that if you're an enthusiast. But if you're going to get a third-party card, aside from the small performance gain, like for example, this MSI card, there's not a huge difference between that and sort of the 3080 third-party card that I have. Yeah, it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit heavier, but the difference isn't quite as drastic as if you compared something like this to the Founders Edition. And if you listen in the background, it's actually running 3D Mark benchmark, and it's really not that loud. You know, the glass panel is actually open, so I'm sure if I put the glass there, you could probably barely hear it if it's running at 100%, a little bit, but not too much. So it's definitely pretty impressive in the amount of power it puts out. It keeps the noises and thermals pretty much in control. Alright guys, so this was just my quick impressions from today. I know everybody's excited about all these GPUs. I just wanted to share some of my experience. Definitely an awesome GPU, but definitely expensive. The 3080 and maybe even the 3070 coming up are going to be a much better value proposition. I plan to do some more content on the 3090, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.